After the defense gives its closing argument tomorrow, the fate of George Zimmerman will then rest with the jury, a jury that is comprised of 6 women, 5 of whom are mothers. The alternate jurors are 2 women and 1 man. There are only 6 jurors because Florida law requires a 12-person jury for potential death penalty cases only, and 6-person juries for all other cases. The jury has been sequestered for the duration of the trial, and the judge has given them these instructions every day.
You're not to discuss the case amongst yourselves or with anybody else. You're not to read or listen to any emails, text messages, or social networking pages about the case. You're not to create or read any of those. You're not to get on the internet to do any independent research about the case, people, places, things, or events, and you're not to read or listen to any newspaper, radio, or television reports. Do I have your assurances that you will abide by these instructions?
Joining me now is Dr. Jara Best. She was part of a sequestered jury in a murder trial last year in Memphis, and that jury convicted a man of voluntary manslaughter, a lesser charge than the first-degree murder charge that the prosecution in that case was seeking. Thanks very much for joining us tonight, and I think a lot of people out there, specifically tonight, are wondering, after you got your jury instruction on that murder charge, how did you work it down to a manslaughter conviction?
Oh, it was a lot of deliberation amongst our jurors. We read over the instructions from the judge. We read it word for word to make sure we understood each and every charge that was presented to us. And it took us a while to finally come to an agreement, but what we did was we made sure we understood every word that was written as far as those instructions that were given to us. And that was probably the hardest part, making sure we followed the law and abided by our instructions. And that was probably the toughest part.
I think, you know, a lot of analysis has said by people who aren't impressed so much by the second-degree murder case here, that the prosecution should have been charging with manslaughter all along. And I think in that analysis there's a presumption that the jury will resent the prosecutors coming in at second-degree murder if what they really have is a manslaughter case here. What's your experience with that? The prosecution coming in at one level on a murder charge and you, the jury, finding something less?
Well, actually, you know, we knew what the initial charge was, and throughout the trial, you know, listening to all the evidence that was presented to us, we were, you know, amongst ourselves, of course, trying to determine what the final charge should be. And, you know, when you're sitting with your fellow jurors, going over the case, listening and going over all the evidence that's been presented to you throughout the whole trial, you're still trying to remember all the evidence you heard and, you know, looking at your notes, trying to remember if this actually fits the charge that's presented to you. Was there enough evidence presented to go with that charge, or do you have to figure out if it was another charge that was actually going to be the final decision? And it was a hard decision amongst the fellow jurors and I.
And talk about being sequestered, what that does to the jurors, and does it? Do you think it improves their attention to the case and their fidelity to the process?
It absolutely does. Like the instructions that were read to the jurors about being sequestered, you aren't exposed to any media, any news media. You aren't able to discuss the case at all until it's handed over to you by the judge. And so you're living with these people pretty much, you know, no TV, no cell phones, nothing. So, you know, you're getting to know these people throughout being sequestered, knowing you can't talk about the case until you're finally handed over with it. But you're getting to know these people. I mean, you're eating with them every day. You're spending an hour with them almost. So you're getting to know your fellow jurors, and just that part in itself helps when you're actually trying to decide on the verdict. You're actually already gotten to know the people that you've been living with for such a while there.
And just quickly before we go, when you finally get to deliberate and you're in that room, the case has gone to you, you are for the first time liberated, you're allowed to talk to each other about what you've been thinking about the whole time. How surprised were you at some of the thoughts of your other jurors?
Yes, that was probably, like you said, the most surprising part, because you don't know what your fellow jurors are thinking throughout all the trial, all the evidence that you're presenting. You're all seeing the same things, but it's how people are perceiving that evidence. It's amazing how different it is, and so that's the whole the whole journey of deliberation, when you're presented with all the evidence, all the forensics, everything the prosecution and the defense is giving you, it's amazing to see how each person interprets those pieces of evidence. And that's part of the deliberation that was maybe the hardest, trying to interpret from all these different personalities and coming up with a decision that we really all finally agreed on.
Dr. Jara Best, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Up next, what George Zimmerman's defense team will want to try to prove in their closing argument tomorrow.